is also being provided for the public here at the DAO, utilizing proper medical screening questions and social distancing. Online public input is encouraged and welcome. A link for this is located on the district website. Community input. We welcome community input. Written comments from visitors must be informational in nature, to address the entire board rather than one particular member, and the Board of Education cannot engage in a discussion or debate in response, but we will take up the information to review and obtain answers when appropriate. For tonight's meeting, we received 3 questions from one person, and one other person just logged in but didn't ask a question. Those questions have been assigned to the appropriate staff, and they're reaching out to contact those individuals. In our lobby, we had no questions tonight. Next up will be our mission statement. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today and tomorrow's society. And before we call the meeting to order, we have a special announcement tonight. Seems like we have a birthday boy, or birthday person, I should say, in our attendance. So happy birthday, Superintendent Willie Jett.
Thank you, sir.
And who wants to lead the song?
La 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 la. Ready?
All right. I'm gonna kick it off.
Here we go.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy
Birthday, dear Willie.
Superintendent Jett.
Happy
Happy birthday to you.
I think we should all keep our day jobs.
So embarrassing.
Yeah,
As a former choir teacher, I'm sorry.
and all I can say is thank you for that. Wouldn't want to spend the birthday any other way, and that rendition was way better than the one I got at home. So thank you.
It was all Monica's idea, so
There is a
either
card.
thank her or blame her.
There's a card and a birthday cupcake here with limited candles.
All right, thank you.
All right, now we will jump into our meeting. No problem. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:34. It's October 7th, 2020. Most of the school board's here, and some people are remote. Would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Shannon? Or less if you want to do it at home.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
The United States of America, and to the republic
for which
it stands,
one nation,
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, Les. Shannon, would you mind taking roll call, please?
That's free.
Yes, I'm remote. Part I have some medical issues that I have to be careful with, so I'm remote.
Is that Dorholt?
Present here at the DAO.
Present here at my house in St. Cloud.
Here at the district office. Alfonso?
Here at the district office.
Monica Support?
Here at the district office.
Hey, Shannon, I can't really hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
And Jeff Coley. Can you hear me now?
No, it sounds like your mic's not on.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. That's good.
There you go. Now you're. Jeff Forbes is here at the district office.
Then also in attendance, Superintendent Willie Jett, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Carol Potter, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, Assessment, and Enrollment, Dr. Sylvia Huff, Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalaroon. Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji. Executive Director of Human Resources, Tracy Flinbeau. Director of Equity Services, Ellen Stewart. Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand. And Executive Assistant, Mary Kusterman.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. First up on the agenda is the approval of the board meeting and work session agenda. This time I'm looking for a motion to accept tonight's agenda as recorded. I have a move by Al. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Monica. Go ahead and take roll, please, Shannon.
Natalie Ringsmith,
Yes.
Shannon Hodge, Al Dahlberg,
Yep.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Jeff Polreese.
Here.
Les Green,
Yes.
and Zach Dorholt.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Next up is the consent agenda, item number 2. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board routinely adopts without debate. Any single member of the board may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. The full text of items can be found at the end of the agenda. On tonight, we have item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, bid award for the DAO HVAC and roofing material package. Item C, approval of the monthly treasurer's report for August 2020. Item D, approval of the monthly financial report for August 2020. Item E, appointment of surrogate parents for students with disabilities. At this time, I'm looking for a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Could you take roll, please?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Shannon Hodge is yes, Natalie Ringsmith,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt,
Yes.
Les Green,
Yes.
and Jeff Polreese.
Yes. Okay, next up, item 3, it's an action item. It's a fiscal year 2020 fund transfer. This presentation is going to be done by Amy Scalaroon, the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chair Polreis, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. So what we're doing tonight is a little bit unusual in that we don't normally approve fund transfers. However, there's some unique authority and extenuating circumstances that have basically put us in a situation where we have excess funds that we're going to potentially lose if we don't transfer them. And we're fortunate, it's kind of twofold. So the excess funds are directly COVID related, and the authority to do the transfer is also a direct result of legislation that the state passed in response to some of the needs and circumstances that districts are exhibiting because of the COVID pandemic. So in your packet, there's a number of attachments. We're really, what the focus is really on is the actual resolution itself. That's what the board has to approve. And then there is a summary of the transfers in the background sheet. There are 4 individual transfer forms that are required to be attached. Those are the forms that have to be sent to the Department of Education. Those forms, we're not going to go through each of them in detail. It really is just a separate form that's required for each different funding source that you're transferring into. And it outlines the specific statute that is related to the funding. It also, for MDE's purposes, indicates the program code and finance code from an accounting standpoint. So we're not going to actually go through the 4 attachments, but they're there for your reference. So just a little bit of a background. There was a legislation, like I said, passed that provides for fiscal years 20 and 21 only that school districts may transfer funds from any fund, essentially, that's not already encumbered or obligated for either salaries or any other federal law. It allows you to transfer any of those available funds into any other fund as necessary. Again, this legislation was approved really specifically to provide options and support for districts in light of funding shortfalls and additional expenditures related to the COVID-19 pandemic. What we're proposing transferring is funds that were remaining in our long-term facilities maintenance program. So the way our long-term facilities maintenance program works is that we levy a set amount, and then we have to spend that full amount, or anything that we don't spend ends up being a levy reduction in a subsequent year. The way that the LTFM program is structured for large districts such as ourselves doesn't allow those unspent funds to build up in a balance because we're levying that amount on an annual basis. And so we ended up with a pretty significant balance unspent in that budget, and primarily because we had a number of projects that got postponed or canceled because of the spring stay-at-home order and the shutdown, and just a number of factors. We had projects where we couldn't get materials because plants and manufacturing was shut down. So what we have is an available balance of $1,875,000 that, if we don't exercise the fund transfer authority, would end up being a negative levy reduction, not this coming year, but the subsequent year when the board would approve that levy next fall. And so we reviewed this with Board Finance Committee. We have a number of shortfalls in other funds, both in last year and projected into 21, where these funds could be beneficial versus having to tap into fund balances or reserves and end up at a deficit position for the end of the year. In the background sheet and in the resolution are the criteria that must be met in order to transfer. The primary ones that MDE is focused on is that it can't result in any sort of additional property tax obligation for our taxpayers, which this doesn't, and it can't transfer into any sort of funding source where it would affect any sort of state aid calculations, and none of these do. And then the second one is item number 6 in the transfer criteria, is that it must not interfere with the equitable delivery of distance learning or social distancing models. And these transfers don't impede anything in that area as well. So like I said, the total amount of the transfer is $1,875,000. That's being proposed to be transferred into a number of sources, which is why you have the 4 actual transfer forms. $425,000 of that goes to Fund 2, which is the food service fund, to cover shortfalls based on reduced meals served both spring as well as into this current school year. $50,000 of that goes to Fund 4 in the youth enrichment area to offset lost revenues for primarily our summer programs, spring and summer programs that were canceled. And then $150,000 goes to Fund 4 community education school readiness, which is our preschool. Again, we had during the shutdown, those are fee-based programs for some of them to cover the loss of the fee-based revenue. And then the remaining $1,250,000 would go to the general fund to cover losses, which will primarily, those losses will end up in 2021. So we'll see that go into, or the majority of that go into fund balance in last fiscal year as we close out the audit, and then it will come back out of fund balance to cover projected shortfalls in the current school year. So that's basically the summary of the transfer. Again, the resolution outlines the criteria, and those individual sheets have the specific statutes around the various funding sources that we're transferring in and out of for your reference. Are there any questions on the fund transfers?
Al, go ahead and start.
I didn't have any questions. I was simply going to move that we accept the resolution for request for the fund transfers, fiscal year 20 fund transfer.
I will second
I'll second.
that. Or Les, go ahead. You were at the meeting too.
I'll second it.
All right. Any discussion before we take roll call? All right. Shannon, would you mind taking roll?
Jeff Paulreith, Monica
Yes.
Segura Schwartz, Monica says yes. Val Dahlgren,
Yes.
Shannon Haas says yes. Natalie Ringsmooth,
Yes.
Zach Dorhoff,
Yes.
and Les Green.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. We will move on to reports. Shannon, will you have one?
Yeah.
All right. You're up first then. We'll have a report from the Board Development Policy and Governance Committee, chaired by Shannon Haas.
We met on September 22nd, and the policies will be coming forward to you. Thankfully, there's only 2 of them. And mentioned to the committee, we did look at 495, and I apologize, it's coming back to us one more time for review and then coming forth. So I'll discuss that further in the committee meeting.
Hey, Shannon, it's hard to hear you, honey. Thank you.
Sorry, I had my. We met in September, and we have a couple policies that you're going to see coming forward now for first reading. And we had one that we were going to present tonight, but it's being pushed back to the Board Development Committee one more time, and then we'll bring it forward.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. Finance and Audit Committee does not have one. Zach, do you have one? Legislative Committee does not have one. Les, I assume you would have one?
No report.
No. Okay. And Achievement, Integration, and Equity also has no report. All right. The time is 6:48. I'll now adjourn tonight's school board meeting and move into our work session. On tonight's work session, we have 6 items. First one up is the MDHR update. It's going to be done by Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Good evening. Both Dr. Huff and myself will be sharing information regarding the update for Department of Human Rights. And I believe Ryan is going to present.
What happened?
Ryan, are you? I can get started. Thank you, Ryan. So in agreement with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, District 742 agreed to provide updates twice a year. Those updates would happen in September and February. You should have received a written summary highlighting the work from January through May 2020. And this presentation will highlight some of the items that were in that written summary that you received. Let me remind you of the mutual goals. You can move ahead, Ryan, thank you. Between the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and our district. And those goals are to ensure that learning occurs in a safe and supportive learning environment, that every student has an equal opportunity to fully participate and succeed in a quality education, and the district will apply its student discipline policies and procedures in a consistent manner. Yeah, you can move ahead, Ryan. The ongoing work that helps us as a district move towards those goals includes the following items. The elimination of zero tolerance policies, except where required by law. That our in-school suspension practices are designed to hold students accountable while keeping them in school whenever possible. That we also engage in a fully implemented and robust positive behavior intervention and support program. Ryan, you can keep moving. Also that we utilize restorative practices to help students right the wrong and engage in mediation between students that have had conflict occur between themselves. Also, that we would employ culturally responsive instructional practices in the classroom, and that we would utilize social and emotional learning curriculum as well as practices to help our students be successful, not only academically, but socially and emotionally as well. And that we would offer additional staff training in classroom management, conflict resolution, and ways to de-escalate classroom disruption conduct. We would also employ programs to engage families, and that we would educate our students on conflict resolution skills, and that a significant expenditure of the district resources would go towards providing in-school alternatives to suspension. On this chart, you see the variety of professional development opportunities for leaders, licensed and non-licensed staff that occurred between January and August. And included in this chart, you see culturally competency training, which is having an awareness of one's own cultural identity and views about difference, implicit bias, and the impact that race and culture has in the classroom. Also, proactive student management training included innocent classroom and responsive classroom. The innocent classroom management model is happening in our middle levels, and the responsive classroom model is happening in concert with conscious discipline at the elementary schools. These are proactive approaches aimed at building relationships and giving teachers the skills that they need to address the emotional and social needs of students. Verbal de-escalation is used during a potentially dangerous or threatening situation in an attempt to prevent a student from causing harm to us, themselves, or others without physically intervening. This training equips staff with the skills and confidence to safely and effectively respond to anxious and potentially violent or aggressive behavior while balancing the responsibility of care of self and others. Approximately 3,000 licensed and non-licensed staff received professional development during the time period from January through August around topics that support culturally relevant instruction, inclusive practices, and supporting the social emotional needs of students. The second outcome that we're going to report on tonight is student support. Community Accountability and Prevention, or CAP, program is unique to our district. This provides an alternative to suspension while allowing for intervention services for students in grades 6 through 10. Services at CAP include special education support, counseling, second step lessons, schoolwork support, and conflict mediation. Due to COVID-19, CAP staff were assigned to help support students virtually. Restorative practice seeks to repair relationships that have been damaged, including those that are damaged through bullying. It does this by bringing about a sense of remorse and restorative action on the part of the offender and forgiveness by the victim. All schools currently have someone trained to lead a restorative circle meeting. Check-in and check-out is a proactive program utilized to support students who need a little extra help managing their behavior. Students check in with an adult periodically throughout the day to provide support, coaching, and mentoring for success. Student Services collaborates with local agencies to provide a variety of mental health supports for students district-wide. We have co-located therapy through Greater Minnesota Family Services in all 13 of our general education sites. This includes 18 staff who service about 419 students in our district. And from March 16 to the end of the school year, Greater Minnesota offered and provided services for their clients and families virtually through Zoom, as well as in person when needed out in the community, honoring social distancing. Student support teams were utilized instead of student support rooms during the COVID or distance learning period in the spring. These teams contacted students regularly to support accessing technology and other academic and social needs that students had. They also offered virtual office hours for families to connect for any needed resources. During the spring of 2020, focus groups were conducted with high school students participating in their school's Gay Straight Alliance. Students shared what life is like for District 742 students who identify as part of the LGBT+ community. They also provided recommendations on how to best support LGBT+ students and how to make our schools safer and more inclusive for all students. Recommendations that could be carried out immediately were implemented prior to the end of the 2019-20 school year, and a plan for addressing other issues was developed. Findings from the focus groups were also presented during the July school board meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Huff at this time, who's going to share with you data for that time period and further information regarding that data.
So the data that we will review this evening reflects January through the middle of March. So basically for the 1920 school year, right before we transitioned into distance learning. And for comparison, we're also looking at the same time frame during the 17-18 and 18-19 school years. So all of the data reflects January through the middle of March for the previous school years as well. And we've made movement in developing programs and practices aimed at eliminating exclusionary practices for students in our district. As you will recall, we were able to significantly reduce the number of suspensions for our elementary students when we presented the MDHR data from the earlier submission. I guess that was in February to the school board. And we are pleased that the numbers for our elementary students continue to remain similar to where we were during the 2018-19 school year. Additionally, for our middle school students, when we're comparing the 19-20 school year to the 17-18 school year, we have seen a decrease in the total number of out-of-school suspensions. However, we recognize that both for middle and high school, we had increased counts of out-of-school suspensions for the 19-20 school year as compared to 18-19 for the same time frame. But we do want to point out that despite this increase, we are following our code of conduct, and so that helps to explain. And also, we want to emphasize the fact that we are primarily suspending for safety-related offenses. You can go to the next slide, please, Ryan. And so in furthering that point, the data on the slide is indicating now the count of safety-related offenses that occurred, again, January through mid-March of those 3 school years. And so you can see those numbers presented below the bars. And the second graph then shows the percentage of out-of-school suspensions that were given as consequences for safety-related offenses. And so basically, compared, when you're looking at the 19-20 school year as compared to the 17-18 school year, there were fewer safety-related offenses, but you can see that the percentage of suspensions for safety-related offenses was higher. And that is because, once again, we are more consistently following our code of conduct and making sure that we are suspending for safety-related offenses. When looking at our special education data, the percentage of out-of-school suspensions earned by students with disabilities is comparable to the previous school years. And our high schools continue to play a large role in working to close the gap in our district, with only 34% of the out-of-school suspensions at the high school level involving students with disabilities. It's also worth noting that the percentage of our out-of-school suspensions involving students with emotional behavioral disorders decreased by 4% as compared to the same time frame of the previous school year. And so the EBD disability code, or emotional behavioral disability or disorder, is one of the categories of the different types of disabilities that we tend to see overrepresentation of out-of-school suspensions. And so we are seeing a decrease during the we did see a decrease during the 19-20 school year for the percentage of out-of-school suspensions given to these students as compared to previous school years. When looking at the data broken out by race, and ethnicity, we realize that there is still much progress to be made in closing the gaps between the number of out-of-school suspensions given to our students of color as compared to their white peers. When you're reviewing this data, you'll want to look across the rows because they total 100%. So it's just broken out across each of the different student groups. And so you can get a clear picture of the percentage of those out-of-school suspensions. And here we're talking about elementary school that are consequences for Black students as compared to the other racial demographics within our district. And once again, the similar representation of the data, but this time looking at it from the middle school level. And this data is representing high school. And so again, it's clear from this particular chart, as well as the two prior, that we have a ways to go in terms of closing this gap. But we again want to emphasize that the statewide initiative is focused on reducing the unnecessary use of exclusionary discipline due to the serious and long-term detrimental effects of these practices. And so school safety is a paramount responsibility of our school district, and nothing in our agreement with MDHR limits our school district's discretion to operate under the code of conduct. We are still responsible for ensuring a safe and focused learning environment for all students. And so although, again, we understand that there's work to be done, we want to also make sure that we reiterate the fact that we have to operate within our code of conduct. Although the data that you just saw shows the gaps that still very much exist, we would be remiss if we didn't mention some of the gains that can't be readily seen just from the data that was presented on the previous slides. And so the data presented here is showing the percentage of suspensions for defiance non-compliance incidences, and this is specifically for our Black students. And so when we talk about defiance non-compliance, those tend to be more of the subjective types of incidences rather than ones that are more concrete. And so again, sticking with our code of conduct, you can see that the percentage of out-of-school suspensions for Black students that fall in that defiance non-compliance category has been decreasing over the past couple of years, and we hope to continue to see that trajectory in the future. All right, and so in summary, we as a district continue to find ways to build upon the programs and practices that are designed to eliminate the exclusionary practices. And although we have significantly reduced the number of suspensions at the elementary and middle level when compared to the first year of our agreement with MDHR, we recognize that there's still work to do. And we are committed to eliminating the disparities that still exist for students of color and students receiving special education services. In terms of our next steps, we plan to further analyze the data regarding who is being suspended and why those suspensions are taking place. And we will continue to develop the appropriate programming and supports for our students in order to better meet their social emotional needs, as well as identify any of the professional development that is needed to better support our staff in meeting the needs of students as well. One of the observations that we've already made from digging into our data is just the observation that we're having higher rates of suspension for our Black female students as compared to other student groups. And so we'll be working with the equity department and others to put into place appropriate supports and programs to remedy this, and then also to just determine how to more appropriately support, again, all of our students in terms of their academic and social emotional needs. And with that, we will open it up to questions.
Natalie, we'll start with you. Do you have any questions? Any questions, Natalie?
Oh man, I had just said so many wonderful questions. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Since Dr. Huff just shared that the group that we're seeing that is still having these disparities is Black females. What I don't think that'd be a Sylvia Huff question, but what programs do we have specifically for our Black females at junior high and high school level?
Could I call on Ellen to talk about those, and Dr. Putnam as well, to talk about what programs we have at the high school level?
From the equity department, we have 4 girls groups from consultants from within the community. And these are basically affinity groups for our students to provide social emotional supports and just help with the struggles that they have in school. We are actually looking to increase that to have groups in every one of the schools, and then looking at how we can also provide supports in the elementary school.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate that. The question I have around suspensions are, where are they happening? And I know that that's probably within that last question where you said you're going to look at the data more to find those patterns. But I'm just wondering, high level, if you know if they're happening, if they're being written up mostly by teachers, or if they're being written up mostly by non-licensed staff, you know, like a school, like a lunchroom or hallway or something like that.
Only an administrator can actually suspend a student. So a staff member in the building could refer,
Right.
but an administrator has to actually make a decision to suspend a student.
Right. I mean, like, where is the offense happening? Is it happening within the classroom, or is it happening? I know it's happening all, you know, in many places, but do you know the pattern we're seeing for that? Specifically, I'm wondering about 712 for that.
I do not have information readily available, but that's something that we can very quickly pull.
That's
in the
great.
data set.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Huff.
Anecdotally, Natalie, anecdotally, if I might step in, the pattern that I believe you will see is it's more teacher driven. Okay, because the teachers are not only in the classroom, the teachers are out in the hallways. And so it's not necessarily, you know, the lunchroom person or a hall monitor or somebody of that nature. It's a teacher that's in the classroom. It's a teacher that's out in the hallway. It's a teacher who's interacting with young people. I would venture to say that's who's going to lead in terms of numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent Jett.
Mm-hmm.
3 more questions. One is, what initiatives do you all find are having the most lasting effects for decreasing out of school suspension for our students with disabilities and students of color? Like, are there some of our many initiatives that we're doing that are rising to the top that really seem to drive that relationship with teachers and students and make sure that it doesn't, as much as we can help get to that point?
Natalie, what I would say about that is our restorative practices is I think probably our most effective at this point, and certainly Carol or Marcia can speak more to that. But when we are able to bring our students together, or our students and our adults together, if that relationship has been broken or harmed, it's certainly a time-intensive process, and it requires willingness on the parts of all parties. But it is absolutely the most effective thing that we've implemented from my perspective.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Putnam. And actually, going on that same thing, is it a similar process for when a student needs to make restoration with a student or a teacher? Is it a similar process when a teacher? Yes, I'm seeing lots of nodding. When a teacher needs to restore a relationship with the students. Okay, wonderful. And then lastly, I hear you saying that it's primarily safety-related offenses that are being suspended for at this point. And so if we see that rise, just to call it the elephant in the room, if we see the rise happening and we're mostly having it in safety-related offenses, since that's what it's looking like, what are the steps that, I don't know what's under the umbrella of safety related. You know, obviously I can think of fights, but is there more under safety related than physical contact?
Yes, that would include any alcohol or drug related offenses, any sort of harassment, threats or intimidation.
Thank you. What I didn't want the public to think is that that's how many fights we've had. You know what I mean? Like that might highlight. So it's more under that umbrella. So okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Les, you'd be next. Do you have any questions?
No, great report and great questions from Natalie. So I've got mine answered. Thank you very much.
Al, you would be next. Any questions, Al?
I think I'm on now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on.
I guess I just had a couple of questions. First one is that when you were talking about the discipline statistics, it was mentioned the statewide initiative was to lower statewide initiative, and my question is with this discipline. I don't know if you'd call it, it's not our discipline policy, but this is the MDHR report that we're doing, and we're one of a very few districts in the state that has to do this report, where we're giving these statistics back to the state. So I'm wondering, what is the statewide initiative, and how are other districts implementing that, and how is it measured for other districts? Is there any type of feedback to MDHR from other districts?
So, Al, we are one of 49 school districts in the state of Minnesota that has to participate in the reduction of exclusionary practices. And so, as a result, these other school districts have to also provide an update or a report twice a year, much like we do. They have to provide their out-of-school suspension data. In addition to that, we now receive feedback on our reports, and it comes in the form of questions or have you thought of. It's not in any way, telling us how we need to do things, but offers us food for thought, if you will. And in addition, as part of that, we are required to attend meetings, which happen 3 to 4 times during the school year, and all the school districts that are part of this come together. There are 3, possibly 4, I can't remember the 4th one, but different committees that each school district is required to be a part of. And so St. Cloud School District is I'm on the implicit bias committee. So we look at exclusionary practices that may happen as a result of implicit bias. And so the purpose of those committees is to learn from one another, to learn what other schools are doing. And when we get together, we offer reports and share practices and ideas.
Okay, so I don't know if that really answered the question, but when I hear the word statewide initiative, I think of something that's dished out to every school in the state. Is that the case here, or is it only the 49 state schools?
Only those 49.
Okay, that's a big difference because there's hundreds of school districts in the state. So I would congratulate the group on taking the information and putting it to use. And we're not just putting a report together, we're actually looking at the numbers, we're spending time on the numbers and deciphering what the meaning behind those numbers is and putting into place practices that are changing what some of those numbers are. And I'm sure that that is the hope and wish of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. How many more years, when this was given to us, because it's a lot of work that goes into this, and I'm not saying it should stop, but how how many years is this agreement for? I thought on this one there was a sunset. On the national one, there was not a sunset.
So at the onset, it was a 3-year commitment, and we are beginning year 3.
Okay. Okay, no more questions. Thank you.
Monica, you be next.
Thank you, Chaporis. I have a couple of questions.
Monica,
So
you be next.
the first question that I have for Sylvia is, Dr. Huff, is what is is there a pattern, or is there a more frequent offense why Black students get suspended at the same time for Black female students?
So specific to Black female students, that is an area that we are beginning to dig more deeply into as of yet. We actually have it on the upcoming principals agenda meeting to have further conversations and have a chance to further explore that data. And so in terms of our students overall, for Black students being suspended and the patterns of that behavior, there hasn't been, that I can see, like a defined pattern as to what the offense is that's leading up to it. But in terms of Black girls specifically, we will be having more in-depth conversations with the principals in the next week or so.
Thank you. I also concerned about seeing a pattern for Black females. I am deeply concerned about that. So when Natalie asked what systems we had in place, and Dr. Stewart answered, everything that was said was directed to the student. So having a pattern like Black females being suspended is concerning for me, not only on the student side, but also into the person that suspends. So what is the staff of the district? How is the staff of the district being addressed on that? So all the programs that I heard of are for the students. So that sounds, or it does feel to me like it is helping the students to fit in, not integrate. So I wanted to ask you, what other strategies are there in place for staff, and also what are you planning into when you're looking at the data? What are you planning to address? How I don't know if I'm being clear about what I'm saying. So I don't know who can answer that question.
Monica, what I would say to that is that we still have work to do. Where we are starting in regard to Black girls specifically is that we had an optional reading. We had a reading list this summer, and one of the books that many of us read and are talking about is in regard specifically to Black girls, Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, Liberation Education for Black girls. Written by the same author as Pushed Out. And then we're, in addition to looking at the data with our administrators, we're reading an article about fighting for the souls of Black girls. And so as we were just discovering this data point for ourselves as administrators at the district level, we are then starting with our building administrators in November, and then we'll be figuring out where to go next, right? I don't have a roadmap laid out yet, but I can tell you that's our starting place. We started this summer, and we'll be happy to update you as we progress.
Thank you. One last question is actually from board member Les Green that seemed to have missed it before. So what is the definition of implicit bias?
It's a good question. I'll attempt to answer that, and then I'll call on other colleagues. But how I define that for myself is having a particular understanding about another social group or another race that may be inherent in myself, and being aware of that. helps me to be more aware of my thoughts and my actions towards other races, other cultures, other genders.
Marcia, thank you for that. Ellen Stewart, as a director of equity, how would you add anything to that as you unmute?
Yeah, no, this is my first. Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I think, you know, the Cliff Notes version of implicit bias is that it's basically unconscious attitudes that people create, and it's our need for looking to trying to get patterns for things. So, you know, trying to get patterns and navigate the complicated world. So what happens is our brain tries to make sense of everything, and in that, we create these biases that we're not aware of.
Thank you.
That's the Cliff Note version. You want the doctoral version?
Dr. Green is shaking his head. He said no, so I think he's saying that's okay.
So I do have a follow-up about the question. So, Dr. Bashir, you said that you are in a group that is about implicit bias. So what I heard from your answer, what you are doing in your group is for each one of you to explore yourselves about what are you sitting on that, and how do you develop, or I guess the next part will be that you will develop strategies to address your own biases. How does that happen, or is anything that you can share about that, or am I right about that's what you're doing?
Yeah, so one of the things that our group is doing is looking at writings, and that our group read was the book called Biased. And so just opening, and I'll speak from my personal, local, and immediate perspective, is that just it talked about a lot of the book shared inherent biases that I, as a white woman, may have that I may not be aware of. Also, just some historical perspective to how biases have become a part of who we are. And so our group, you know, has read that. We engage in conversation, and then we talk about what we can and should be doing and are doing in each of our districts, particularly in my group around the topic of implicit bias.
Thank you. So yeah, that last part is what my question really wanted to hit. So that sounds like a lot of personal work and self-work that you're doing, and thank you very much for doing that. That's great. How does that translate into a district initiative or a district program, or how is that? If I don't know if that is time for that right now, but you just mentioned at the end of your answer that that's looking at how or what you do in the district. So could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
I would have our director of equity jump in to discuss that, please.
Yes, no worries. So Monica, I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're asking, what does the trainings that we have right now at the administration level, how that then gets to our teachers and our students? Is that how I understand your question?
Well, that will be part of it, but so kind of particularly, I was asking Dr. Bashit. She is in a group with other districts. They're talking about implicit bias, and her description of what they do in that group is a lot of personal work, person working in her places, working on myself. So which seems great, but how does that goes to our district? So she comes and talk to you, and then you say, let's do this, or does she tells you, do they work in that group about how everybody goes to their districts about doing that kind of thing? Is that kind of, that's what I'm wondering.
So when I'm doing work on bias, and you know, I'd recommend Jennifer Ebhart, I think is her name. The book Bias is very, very good. The bias work, as Marcia said, is that you're not even conscious that these things are going on. You're not even aware of them. And so one of the things in working on yourself is that you're able to be conscious of the things that you're doing. So how you recognize students, how you looking at policies, etc. There is a video that I show where these people are passing a basketball back and forth. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the folks are to count the number of times that the team in the white shirt passes the ball. And there's actually a gorilla that comes through through the camera. And most people don't see the gorilla because they're so focused on the kids passing the ball. And that's what bias is that you're so focused on some things that you're used to that you don't even see the bigger picture of other things that are going on. And Les Green said he has a comment.
I was just trying to adjust Monica's comment specifically. I think that as, for example, Dr. Beisch spends a great deal of time in talking with these other people, that her behavior, attitude, and aura as she comes back to the district and begins to talk to other people, is how some of that information is transferred. So it's not necessarily she would come back and do a training session, but I think as you get involved in these things, your attitude changes. You're more aware of things. You're more particular about what you might say to someone who might respond in a way that that seems odd to you now after you've had the training, and you might respond to them in it. So I think it just when you have a room full of administrators who've been through this kind of training, as they begin to walk the halls and talk with their teachers and people like that, they seem to have a different sense about them and sensibility that I think transfers that way. So if that's helpful, I hope it makes some sense.
All right, you good, Monica?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Elle, you have a follow-up question?
I have a follow-up question on the effect of expulsions that occurred last year. Are those included in suspensions, or are those excluded from suspensions when we look at the data?
Sorry, my mute button wasn't working. This is only looking at the suspensions. The expulsions are not counted in that data.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Huff, it looks like I have a couple questions, but I'm only going to ask one, and you can hit me up tomorrow. My computer's been acting up a lot. If Ryan would go back to the slide where you're comparing by race the suspensions for the high school.
Slides for elementary, middle, and high school?
Yeah, it's like slide number 6 or 7, I believe it was. The question I'll have is, it shows suspensions based by race. I would like to either know the answer or have you add another column to that. How is that compared to how much that student body race makes up of the student body? Because that doesn't really compare apples to apples. I kind of want to know, you know what I'm getting at?
Yes. So when we're talking about race, Ryan, can you go
Right through the slide before that.
Yep. So that one's fine. So this is elementary, for example.
That's the one. That slide right there.
And then the next slide is middle school, and then the subsequent one is high school. So in the 1920 school year, of all of the out-of-school suspensions that are reflected in that very first data slide, the 256, I think, is the overall total. To that total, a number was made up of 217 students. And of that 217 students, 153 of them were Black. So when we're talking about Black students overall, and what that looks like, roughly 4% of the Black students in our district received an out-of-school suspension.
And that Sylvia, you're talking about the elementary slide, correct?
Well, I'm talking about it in a whole. So we had elementary, middle, and high school. And when we're talking about just the Black suspension data overall, so out of all of the suspensions, and I think, Ryan, if you could go to the slide, I think it's 8, the very first data slide. Yep. So
Are these slides numbered?
So when we're talking about the count of suspensions overall, so you can see that in 1920, during the 1920 school year, from January through mid-March, there were a total of 256 suspensions across the board. Those suspensions across the board were consequences given to 217 students. So 217 students made up that 256. And out of that 217, 153 of them were Black. And so when we're talking about the percentage of that 153 Black students out of our total population of Black students, it's less than 4% of our Black students in the district.
Correct me if I'm naive, but that doesn't sound alarming when you put it that way.
So when you think about the percentage that our Black students make up in the district as compared to their white peers, the fact that over 70% of our suspensions are consequences that are given to Black students, that's where the disparity really comes into play.
Okay, maybe I'm not asking the right question. Flip a slide, Ryan. Go any direction you want. So I need to see the slide where it talks about high school, elementary, that one. Stop there. Right there. Now, Dr. Huff, go back one slide, Ryan. Of the 64% of the write-ups, Ryan, go back one and stop. Of the 64% of write-ups for Black students, what percentage of the students is that 64%?
Of the 60, so for elementary, I can get you.
No, stop right there. Just the high school, 64%.
Right. So this slide is showing that of our elementary students, of the out-of-school suspensions that were given to elementary students, 64% of them were given to Black students. And I don't have the number in front of me of exactly what count of elementary students that represents, but that again relates to what I was saying from that initial slide when we're talking about the total number of suspensions was a total of 153 Black students across the board. So the elementary count would factor into that. So of 153, I don't know the total off of the top of my head of how many of those were elementary level Black students, but they would be included in that count.
Okay, I'm gonna have to talk to you on the phone tomorrow or something. I'm not driving home what I really want to be asking, evidently.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead, Monica.
So just want to take a shot at this. I think, Jeff, that you are looking at the percentage of suspensions of Black students compared to the number of Black students. Is that correct?
Somewhat, yeah. Yeah.
So you can also look at the percentage of white students suspended compared to the number of white students, and then that should show you the same disparity. Is that right, Dr. Huff?
Right. So exactly.
So you can tell us what is the percentage of white students that had been suspended and overall students?
Yep. And so like we're seeing on the slides here, this again is just for elementary, but for all of our elementary level out of school suspensions.
No, sorry, Dr. Huff. You give us a 4% of all in the overall students. You give us a 4% for Black students that are being suspended.
Yes.
So let's compare that one exactly the same. So how many white students of the overall students are what is the percentage of white students suspended?
Let me pull it up for you. Give me 1 second. So we have Sorry, I'm calculating this really quickly for you.
Thank you. Sorry. I thought that was important since you made a big point there.
While she's doing that, I have a question for Ryan and Gary. Can you guys make sure that all presentations in the future have a number on each page that the board can see?
Yep, we can do that.
Thanks.
Sylvia?
Yes.
The part that I believe when I first heard you present it, and I know that you're digging through because the information they're asking for, you have it in a whole bunch of different data sets and things of that nature. But the one thing that I heard everybody when I was listening to you was when you said that 4%, the number was 4%, and then you said Black students.
Correct.
And when I look at this slide, I'm going to stick strictly with elementary. Okay. All of a sudden, I see in 1920, the way I understand this is 64% of the suspensions were Black students. Maybe that's not the way it is, but in other words, the minute when I heard Chair Polrace, and when he asked the question, he said, maybe I'm naive. I'm going to use your word, sir. You said, maybe I'm naive, because what he heard was the number 4%. And so when you hear 4%, you're thinking that's not a significant number. I'm not saying not significant, don't get me wrong, but that's a low number. And did you actually mean 4% as I'm looking at this slide? Because the only 4% I see on there is American Indian, and then I see Hispanic, 4%. But when you said Black, the number 4%, that was said, but I'm looking at this slide and it says 64.
Right, so it's talking about it two different ways. So the way that the data is presented in this graph shows that of all of the elementary out-of-school suspensions from January through mid-March, 64% of them were given to Black elementary students. What I understood Jeff's question to be was, well, what does that make up of the total Black population? Like basically out of all of our Black students, how many students are receiving suspensions? And so that's when we were getting into the counts of, okay, well, when we look at the overall count, there were only 217 students in our district across the board who made up all of those suspensions. And then out of that 217, it was the 153 that were Black students. And then that 153 Black students, when you take that out of the total number of Black students in our district, what percentage does that represent? And so that is the smaller percentage. Like, so that's what's not shown on this graph. It's like the number of Black students receiving suspensions out of all Black students in the district. And so what Monica was asking for is the comparison for white students. And so that's what I was pulling.
Okay. But it's 153 out of 217 students total.
153 Black students out of 217 students total that received.
Okay, thank you.
And how many total Black students do we have?
So in the 1920 school year, we had a little over 4,000. 4,065 is the number that I'm seeing that we ended the school year with.
So 153 write-ups out of 4,000 students.
Correct.
But Sylvia, is that data just for elementary though that you were referring to?
No, the 153 is all suspensions. So that very first data slide that I had Ryan navigate back to, that, Ryan, would you mind? I'm sorry. Yes, that one. So when we're looking at that final column for District 742, during 1920, there were 256 out-of-school suspensions in total. And those suspensions were consequences given to 217 students. So some students were suspended more than once. And of that 217, 153 were Black students. And so but that's spread across elementary, middle, and high school. And so Monica, to your question, in terms of the count for white students, there were 42 white students last year who received suspensions during that time frame. And let me get the total. So total count of white students was a little like 4,800. So we've got 29. And so double check this one more time. Out of 4,829. Yeah, and so less than 1% of our white students received suspensions during that same time frame last school year.
Dr. Huff, I think you got to where I wanted to be. That makes more sense. Now you're comparing 4% to 1% or 400 times as much. Now it makes more sense. Is there a way to incorporate some of that into the chart for next year so it jumps out at you better?
So the data, the way that it is organized was based on the feedback that we received from MDHR in terms of the counts and information that they wanted. And so we wanted to make sure to share those charts with you as well so you could see what they were requesting from us. But if that would be an additional data point to help explain the disparity for you all, we can also include that in the summary going forward.
I can't speak for other members, but that definitely helped me. Al, do you have a second question? Then we'll wrap this up. Oh, yeah, you do.
I do. And after listening to this discussion for a while, I want to say this. This whole thing with MDHR and this particular approach that they take is, I think that this has been one of the most racist conversations that I've been involved in on the school board. I thought, and I truly believe this, that we handed out suspensions based on behavior, not on skin color. And we've just had almost a 45-minute conversation about why we're suspending black kids or why we're suspending white kids, as if race is the only reason. And I, for one, will stand behind the teachers in this district, and I will say that I don't believe that our teachers are suspending students or our administrators are suspending students based on the color of their skin. I believe that we have a system in this district where we take kids, and if suspension is the appropriate punishment or the appropriate thing to do for that student, it is because the behavior that that student exhibited at one point before this happened was worthy of being suspended. And there may be some disparities. There may be, if we did this by economic disparity and we put high income earning families next to low income earning families, I don't think it would be 50-50. I don't think that you would see the same rate of suspension from low income families as you do with high income families. But that's not what we're basing our suspension decisions on. We're basing it on behavior. And I have a hard time sitting here listening to a conversation where the only thing we talk about and the only reason the kids are either getting suspended or not getting suspended is the color of their skin. Because I don't believe that's true. And if it is, we got a big problem in this district. And I don't believe that we do. Thank you.
Les, you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, Alan, I think it's important for us to focus not on who's being suspended, but on the concept of suspension, and that we're using the differences between black students and white students as a way to sort of begin to talk about the issue. We're trying not to suspend students because when they're not in school, they're not learning. And I don't disagree. It's kind of a difficult thing to see the 4% and 1% differences. I firmly believe that behavior is a major driver of whether you get suspended, and sometimes response to intervention creates a different response from a teacher because some students may react differently, and some may, in terms of being more explosive, and others may react in a less in a less explosive manner. From my experience in school, both as a student and also as a student teacher, a substitute teacher at some of our schools, there is some connection. But I think that one of the things that we have to also look at is that is the reason for the concept of implicit bias, and that when you begin to understand those things, that they may have some impact on how you might respond to a student if you understand you may be coming from a perspective that you didn't even know you had. This is not a situation, I believe, where we're talking about black students being suspended for behaviors that white students are not suspended for. I don't believe our teachers are doing that, but I think we have to figure out a way to talk about this concept so that that we're not afraid to engage each other in conversations that are sometimes difficult to get into about, because you're standing there looking at these numbers and you go, well, why are these numbers like that? Well, if we take the quick and dirty approach to it's a problem with our teachers, we're never going to solve the problem. So I think that what we've got a good staff who are trying to tiptoe into this thing, but they're getting their feet wet and they're getting their hands dirty because there's no other way to get into this stuff if you're not willing to do that. So, but I appreciate your comments, Al, because I think you're on the verge of saying, wait a minute, we got to be careful about how we talk about our teachers, and I agree with you. But we also have to find a way to be able to get into these kinds of conversations, and
Thanks.
Be able to do whatever. So, with that, I'll stop talking. So, thanks.
Natalie, your last question, then we're going to go on to the next subject. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be careful here with assigning blame and thinking that that's what this conversation is about. We're not assigning blame to any one person, definitely not to our teachers. This conversation is about the way we are socialized. And that's what my understanding of implicit bias is about, that our socialization, not because I'm a racist white person, but because I was socialized in a certain way, not having many friends of color growing up, if any, that I have to do some work to check myself. When I was a teacher, I had to do that. As well, I just want to remind folks that until 1960, public education was a segregated institution. So we have to understand our past and continue to have an eye on the present. And that's, I think, what MDHR is doing. There is no reason for us as a school district to be mad with MDHR about this. This is making us better. This is hard work that's making us better. And we're getting to have hard conversations that we have to have in 2020. So I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And I also appreciate you guys sharing it with us so we can have these conversations and really know where we are and know what we're doing, so that when families say, hey, I heard that, Black girls are having the hardest time. What are you doing for them? I'm able to say, you know what, let me reach out to Ellen. I can connect you with some of those programs. It's those connections, knowing our most marginalized folks. We do that already as a school district. We don't have equal programming. We have equitable programming. So some folks need a little bit bigger box than others. Same thing across race, across class, just like you're saying, Al. But let's not get mad at the people who are trying to help us. Let's just make each other better. That's what we're here to do.
All right.
Jeff, I want to clarify something.
You owe me one.
All right. We did not have segregated education in this nation for all public schools up until 1960. There was a part of the country that segregated schools. Not all schools in the country were segregated. So I think that I grew up in South Minneapolis, and that 15% of our population were Black students. Seemed like a lot, but we didn't have segregated institutions in all schools. Just part of the country. It doesn't negate anything that Natalie said, though. Okay, that's important to read. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Les.
I want to add something too.
Go ahead.
I just want to add that the reason that I asked the question about suspensions versus expulsions is we had a significant number of students expelled last year. And I believe it was all boys except one girl. And I mean, I don't know how significant that is, but we're not talking about huge numbers here. And when you take that many students out, that could have a statistical impact on what's being shown for girls as far as growing in suspension rates from one year to the other, especially to the total suspensions, girls are going to rise as a percentage because we removed a significant number of boys. And I don't know the answer to it. I just raised it because I think it needs to be considered. It's a significant number within the statistics.
I'm not sure if this answers or addresses that, Al, but while investigations are going on and students are suspended, those suspensions are still counted in that data. So even if students were ultimately expelled or whatever the outcome was, any suspension that happened in the interim would still be counted in this number, as well as those individuals being included in the denominator of like total student count, total Black student count, and so forth.
All right. I'm going to go out on a limb. Anybody? All right. We're going to move on. Thank you, ladies, for the presentation. Thank you, board members, for the tough questions. It's needed. We're going on to number 2, enrollment update. It's going to be done by Amy Scullerud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you. I do have the report getting presented. I know, I apologize, it's a lot of numbers and the numbers are small. For those who are watching, I know board members who are here at the DAO do have a printed copy, and it was also emailed out to board members in advance of the meeting, if it's easier to look at in that format. So what we do every year is provide an enrollment update. You'll see that these numbers are as of September 28th. We typically do kind of two different periods where we look at numbers. We usually use kind of that second Friday of when school starts, and then we adjust those for October 1 numbers. We're kind of at an interim point this year because the second Friday, we pushed back kind of our normal period that we would look at attendance because of the delayed start to in-person instruction and with some of the adjustments with the school year. So what we're looking at is data for 2020, that's as of September 28th, and these are kind of comparable to those second Friday counts for previous years. So what we'll do, if you want to just scroll down, we'll look at the total and then we can talk about some of the individual sites. When we look at the total, we usually look at kind of that second from the bottom bolded number. Early childhood can fluctuate from year to year. And so the numbers that include early childhood in the grand total line are somewhat misleading and not always real accurate. So what we look at that's really more comparable from year to year is the total K-12 plus our alternative setting, alternative site programs. And so when you look at those numbers, at October of last year, we were at 9,623, or sorry, the September of last year. This year, we are at 9,249. So that is a decrease of 374 students. I do want to point out that about 125 of this actually occurred last year due to enrollment decline for a number of reasons, and kind of at all age levels. Some of that was a decline in ALC enrollment last year, just because we didn't get that normal influx in the spring. We didn't have the students coming in and out and transitioning from member districts like we normally did. Some of that was at the elementary level. Some of that was, like we just talked about, due to some of those expulsions and other students exiting the district last year. So there was a portion of this decrease that we knew about and that was budgeted. So like I said, that's about 125 students that was anticipated. The rest of that decrease, there's really a number of factors, and we can talk about some of the specific schools, but it's really across the board. There are a couple schools specifically that and one school in particular that has a really significant decline. But other than that, it's really spread out across all sites, across all grade levels, and really, we do get information from families whenever we can. Sometimes we don't get a direct communication from a family that we're leaving. We don't know that they're leaving until we get the records request from the new school. So, it's not 100% obviously response rate by any means, but we do have our principals who track, some of the data in terms of the why. A big portion of what we're seeing this year, and really, it's to some extent speculation because we don't have solid 100% data to go off of, but we are feeling like the decrease is significantly COVID related. There's a number of families who've expressed interest in enrolling where they can get that full all in-person instruction, whether that be at the elementary level or the secondary level, and they may be enrolling into a neighboring district or a charter school or a private school that was starting the school year in an all in-person model. We do also have an increase in homeschool families. We have 66 new students who registered for homeschool this year, who were not homeschooled last year. And we know that some families may have selected other online virtual public school district options. So kind of a number of factors in terms of the decrease. And again, a lot of that increase is at the elementary level. We do have a decrease at the 7 to 12 numbers too. The decrease at tech is really more a factor of a large class size going out. You'll see that they had 403 student class size, which is actually larger than you would typically see. And so a lot of their decrease is actually just class size driven. And then there's a significant decrease also at McKinley. And part of that is just the nature of that program. It can fluctuate. If you look at the trend data from year to year, that will really vary from year to year, depending on how many students are in need of credit recovery. And I suspect that is down somewhat this year. Also, just because we may not be getting as many referrals from ALC from our member districts in an attempt to not be cross-district, having cross-district exposure due to the COVID risk. So not too surprising that is down, and that's attributing to 48 of the decrease. The single largest decrease, and again, number of reasons after talking to the principal, but Kennedy has the largest decrease with a loss of 127 students this year. And so, and again, it's across all grades. If you see, Kennedy is listed on this report twice. They're listed up above for their K-6 enrollment, and then right about the middle of the page for the 7th and 8th grade. And so it's really across the board. And it's a number of factors. Some of that is enrolling in other public schools. Some of that is enrolling in private schools, home schools. Some are just flat out physical moving and relocation out of our area altogether. So a number of kind of a combination of reasons there. So that's really the gist of the numbers. The one thing I do want to add is obviously numbers are going to fluctuate as the year goes on. If I just out of curiosity had the enrollment report run today just to see kind of where we're at, and we have actually gained 33 students since this October or since this September 28th count. So we're up a little bit, but it's really fluctuating every day. And I suspect that as various schools, whether that be public or private, where some of the students may have gone to change or potentially, have changes in learning models, we may see more so than in previous years, a lot of fluctuation in and out throughout the year. That could happen with homeschools too. It's not unusual in a normal year for us to have a few homeschool students who start out the year and then they decide that that's just functionally not working and they end up transitioning back. So this is really a snapshot in time, and it's just something we'll have to monitor throughout the year as the year goes on to see how things fluctuate in and out. But like I said, I suspect that that's going to be very common this year.
All right, Al, you can start us off with questions. You're not on, Al.
Okay, I'm on now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, Amy, I don't see kindergarten broken out on this at all. And I'm wondering, are we counting kindergarten students as one for one? So one kindergarten student is one enrollment?
Yes, so everything counts 1 for 1. Kindergarten, just as a reference, we are at about 39 kindergartners less than what we had last year. And so definitely, you know, a portion of that decrease, not all of it by any means, but we are certainly seeing lower kindergarten numbers than what we would typically have seen compared to last year.
Okay, do you feel like that was a significant portion of the decrease? Or 39 out of
39 out of, you know, if you take out the decrease from last year that, you know, we kind of anticipated, that's about 39 out of 250 ish. And then McKinley is about
20%.
50, yeah, 20% of that is kindergarten. About, you know, 20% of that is the ALC decline. So, you know, those two things alone are making up a pretty big portion of that.
But kindergarten wouldn't have as significant of an effect on our budget?
So everything, kindergarten funds the same as any other 1st through 6th grade student. We get more per pupil for our 7th through 12th grade students because those fund at 1.2%. So you actually get 1.2 times the per pupil funding for a secondary student, but a kindergarten student funds the same as.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought they were funded less than that.
The pre-K, the voluntary pre-K fund less. Now that kindergarten is all day funded statewide, a kindergarten student generates the same funding.
Okay, thank you.
Les, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Natalie?
I don't have any questions, but thanks for putting this in a document we can really see and understand. Thanks, Amy.
No problem.
Amy, it looks like I might be the last one with questions on it. If I'm calculating my math right, the early childhood section is 37% of the decrease. Other than COVID, what would the reason be? Did we do anything different with?
So the biggest chunk of that, and voluntary pre-K is down a little bit, and part of that is just, I think, still timing on trying to get some of the students who opted out, you know, for whatever reason because they only wanted full-time. We're still sorting through some of the waiting lists. I suspect that for the voluntary preschool early childhood line, we'll be back up closer to where we were last year. It's just kind of a timing issue on trying to get that sorted out. The big decrease is really coming from the early childhood special ed, and that's primarily because they're behind in those assessments. Because normally we'd be assessing students who are referred in the spring and over the summer, and so we lost such a large portion of our assessment period where we would normally be identifying students for early childhood special education. And so we're just now that we're, you know, as we got into the summer, we're trying to play catch up on that. And so that number, I suspect, and Carol can add if she wants to add anything, but I suspect that we're going to see that number go back up. And again, those don't fund 1 for 1. These are actual student counts. But early childhood, they're only attending, you know, partial days. So they're not generating a full student's worth of revenue. So, you know, it's a little bit different. Same with the voluntary preschool. These are actual student counts, actual physical students, not ADMs that we're looking at. But I do suspect that that's going to go back up. It's just a timing lag on the referrals.
Amy, I'll just add on that piece too, is that the majority of the child find comes from physician referral. And so our healthy kids were not seeing their physicians during this COVID period and over the summer. So it's a combination of our kids not referred at such a high rate, and for the fact that the kids that we did have coming in, we weren't able to get to all of them for evaluation. And so it's a combination of the two.
Carol, why couldn't we get to them for an evaluation?
Well, initially we weren't allowed to do evaluations, so we weren't allowed to go into family homes when in March, when COVID first struck. And so for a long period of time, we weren't able to complete those evaluations. In the summer then, in about mid-June, they changed that a little bit, that we could bring kids in but there was a lot of PPE and a lot of dynamics that were around that in order to complete an assessment. So we couldn't complete the assessments at the rate that we had completed them before. We did complete some over the summer, but not as many as we did. And now we're playing catch up.
Do you have enough staff?
I think we have enough staff to do that. We always have a bit of a backlog coming in with our birth to 3. And so I think we're okay right now. I think we're okay.
All right, so if I was a parent waiting for an assessment and it's October 7th, when can my kid finally get into school?
Really good question.
Very important to me as a parent. I'm waiting. Yep. I'm anxious.
Yep, you bet. And so the assessments in early childhood are on a 45-day time frame. And so when can you get into school? You can come into school right away, but it just depends on the services that you would be receiving. And so there's a couple different parts to it, which we can talk more offline too, Jeff. And so if you are a birth to 3 student, those services are typically happening in the home. At age 3, the kids come into Quarry View where their services would be vended there. And so most students, not all, are typically assessed by age 3 coming in. And so that 45-day assessment period occurs prior to that. Now, do we get kids that come to school age 3 and we identify needs and we assess them? Yes, it's still a 45-day window for early childhood to complete an assessment. And so the kids can be in school the whole time. It's just that they won't necessarily have their complete assessment done.
As a parent, do I know that?
Yes. Yes.
So they're told their kid can come in and we'll figure it out as we get time, but at least your kid's in school.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Shannon?
I'm wondering about Lincoln and Talahi. Was it 2018 when we did 2 schools, 1 community?
Was that last 19?
It was last year.
Last year was the first school year. And so Lincoln and Talahi are actually, so yeah, if you compare 18 to 19, you'll see that that discrepancy where Talahi goes down and Lincoln goes up because we had some shifting between the two. Lincoln and Talahi this year are interesting. Talahi is actually up 51 students from last year, and Lincoln is down 46 students. And and maybe Marcia knows my suspicion, because when we look at it by grade level, we certainly see larger loss of students by grade level in our 3rd through 5th, where students are attending 2 days physically versus the 4 days physically. And so I suspect that is primarily attributed to that in terms of parents who may have childcare needs and may have explored whether that be another public school or a charter school or a private school or whatever it might be. The fact that it is the 2 schools, 1 community, we would typically see that enrollment for those 2 schools mirror each other. And so it's a little bit unique that it doesn't in that regard.
Okay, yeah, that's what surprised me too, was that they were going in the different directions.
Yep.
All right. No other questions? Thank you. We will move on to item number 3, proposed revised board policy 414. This is up for a first reading. Going to be done by Shannon Hawes, Chair of the Board Development Policy and Governance Committee. You get caught up. Just so you know, I'm going to move school updates up to number 5, just so Marcia and Lori and Willie know. So.
I think I'm presenting 414, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good evening, Chair Paul Reese, Board Member, Superintendent Jett. This is a first reading of changes to Board Policy 414. Thank you, Ryan, for presenting. Most of these changes are, in fact, all of these changes are recommended in a recent update to the MSBA model. And lots of it is just cleanup of sentences or changes from the statute. So if you, this 414 is the mandatory reporting policy, and it is driven by Minnesota statutes. And so again, many of the changes are coming there. If you'll go up, Ryan, to section E, thank you. There's the first changes, and you can see those are just cleanup of those sentences to add the words health care and medical care. If you want to keep scrolling to section J, this change is in the definition of sexual abuse, and that is related to changes that happened in Minnesota statutes relating to the definition of various aspects of the sexual abuse definition. So you see those there, and removal of that note about sex trafficking. That was an earlier note before the statute had changed, and now that is fully encased inside the statute at this point. Paragraph N was in our policy. It is not in the model policy. And at board development, we talked about whether or not defining schools, since it's not in the model, is appropriate for our policy. I think the board development committee and I share their view that the definition might, by definition, imply that other kinds of our facilities are excluded. And clearly the statute for mandatory reporting applies to all school programs, school sites, and the district as a whole, and applies to all school employees regardless of their setting. And so the recommendation of the board development committee was to remove that definition of schools. And again, it doesn't appear in the model policy. So I think that's a good recommendation. The next sections are just updates on some of those contact information and numbers for our local social service agencies or the law enforcement agencies to update telephone numbers and those kinds of things. Moving down to paragraph C. Again, just a cleanup in the sentence that's recommended by MSBA. Moving down to the investigation section, you see I highlighted the word not because the underlining doesn't represent a change in the policy. That underlining is in the policy because the policy is intended to be very clear that when it talks about an investigating agency coming to interview a child at school and whether or not parents will be notified in advance about that interview, that is not a school decision. That's made by the investigating agency. And so that underline on the word not is intentional, and it's part of the existing policy, and that underline does not indicate a change. So I highlighted that just so that is clear. That's part of the policy. And those are all of the recommended changes from the MSBA. Happy to take any questions. Okay. Thank you.
Jeff, did you introduce 806? I couldn't hear you.
Yes, he did, Gary.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah.
It's okay. I had trouble reading your lips there, Jeff, with the mask. So,
yeah. Oh, this computer, it's going to kill me yet.
That's all right. Understandable. So 806 is the crisis management policy. is if you recall when we brought it here in, was it 2000? Yeah, July of 2017. We talked about how the policy was updated at that time. This particular policy doesn't follow closely with MSBA's policy, and the reason for that is twofold. The first is the MSBA policy hasn't really kept up with current practice in emergency management, the best practices out there. The second reason is, looking at the screen, many of you have attended our district EPAC meetings. That's the advisory committee where we bring in first responders once a month, and we take input and we work with the experts in the field. And in 17, that committee dug into this and developed this policy, working from the MSBA policy to come up with a policy that really works for us in the St. Cloud community. And so the changes that you see tonight are tweaks to what we brought in 2017. The first one is under the purpose. And quite honestly, I don't know how we missed this last time. This part is in the MSBA model policy, but it describes that EPAC committee. The district will, to the extent possible, engage in ongoing emergency management within the school district with emergency responders and other relevant community organizations. And it just outlines that we have that group and it does meet. And then the other changes, thanks Ryan, would be in section 4A and C. And these are really minor changes. It's to align wording and terminology from what we actually use in the school district. And so again, this varies from some of the language in MSBA's to make it align with what we're doing. And I believe those are all the changes. Yes. And I will entertain questions.
Les, any questions?
No, I have none.
Natalie, any questions?
None from me.
All right, thank you. Shannon, do you have any questions? Okay, thank you, Gary. Next up is item number 5, because I moved it up. School updates, activities updates, and COVID-19 updates. Going to be done by Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, and our Superintendent, Willie Jepp. Go ahead.
Good evening again, Chair Pollery, Superintendent Jett, members of the board, and those in the community joining the meeting via live streaming. I have the opportunity to kick us off this evening. Ryan, you can go to the next slide. This first slide showcases, I'll wait till Ryan gets there. Right. You can go to the next slide, thanks Ryan. This first slide showcases some of our early childhood classrooms. The students here are learning school routines and engaging in hands-on activities to support and increase their overall development. Included also on this slide is a picture of a preschool teacher preparing for her first virtual teaching from home to her students that are on site in her classroom. Her computer is in split screen, so you can see her classroom as well. Students in elementary schools have quickly learned the health and safety protocols. Our K-2 friends at Falahi are demonstrating social distancing as they move through the hallway. And our little friend on the right is reminding us to stay 6 feet apart. Young learners at Falahi are also becoming proficient at utilizing their device for learning. Teachers have spent these first several weeks of school ensuring students know how to navigate the learning platform Seesaw, and students have learned the necessary skills to be successful with their device at home and at school. Morning meeting takes place in every elementary school for students in person and students learning from home. In this picture, you can see how students who are at home joining morning meeting via Google Meet are incorporated into the classroom. Students may at times engage in active movement during morning meeting, as you can see on the right. You can see on the screen, I know it's hard to see, but those are the students that are joining from home. And then you can see the students in the classroom are on their devices. And this is morning meeting. That slide doesn't quite look like it was supposed to, but that's all right. The Educational Equity Outreach Coordinator from Discovery facilitated the production of videos in Spanish and Somali for families, showing them how to utilize their hotspots. Also, in addition, we are going to be adding the support of a talent development specialist to the Distance Learning Academy. Data reports of students in grades 3 through 5 indicate that there are DLA students who would benefit from the support of a talent development specialist. A staff member with the ability to add additional students to their caseload will take on this assignment.
Good evening. Today, I wanted to take a few minutes to show you some examples of the learning and teaching activities and community building that has happened over the last few weeks in our secondary schools. In this slide, you can see on the left on one of our EL classrooms at Apollo, and we've got a teacher and some students, again, coming in virtually, and then some students working in the classroom. And then on the right, you can see one of our students choosing some nuts and bolts for one of the CTE classes. Here, of course, is an orchestra class happening at Apollo. The students are masked, socially distanced, and making beautiful music. And this is a 9th grade science class. They're actually learning about velocity, and the masks and social distancing expectations have not prevented them from getting some hands-on learning in, as you saw from both the fine arts and the CTE examples prior. The students were making paper airplanes and creating some predictions and testing out their models, and then using that engineering process of redesign and trying again. So that's what you can see here. And this is a couple slides from Kennedy. We're excited to show you that on the left, out in their beautiful prairie, you've got some 7th grade field ecologists out making observations, hopefully avoiding the ticks, and documenting their findings in their science notebooks. And then on the right, you can see some evidence of 8th grade scientists who are exploring physical and chemical changes in the lab. And of course, classroom learning is not the only learning that happens. We've got learning happening on our fields and in our tennis courts and on our cross-country tracks. And this is the Apollo Tech boys soccer game that took place last week. And that was, of course, an exciting event. They did tie at their game last week, to the chagrin of both principals, who you can see on the right, who, of course, had a lot to say to one another ahead of time in the spirit of friendly crosstown rivalry, of course. Soccer sectionals are upcoming, as are swimming and cross country. And tennis sectionals have gotten underway. And I'd like to take a minute to just say congratulations to Ashley Torelli, who broke all the previously held records for wins. Those were held by her sisters, so congratulations to her. We've had some, although they aren't featured here, we had our new classes of National Honor Society inducted. Those were held virtually and then live streamed for all families so they can see them. Tech ceremony happened about a week ago, and the Apollo ceremony is probably wrapping up as I speak. Some of the other activities that are happening include our GSAs and esports. And the great thing about these is they can happen virtually or in person. So students, no matter where they're learning from, are able to participate. And this slide is, I think, really an exciting introduction to work that's being done by our equity department in collaboration with our building administrators. This is a couple photos of the North Junior High first Somali parent meeting. Thanks to the work of Ellen and her team, we've trained our BCSSs and EEOCs who serve across K-12 schools in our technology platforms, including Skyward, Schoology, and Seesaw. Those folks then are hosting sessions to teach our families about how to access those platforms so that we can better support our students, whether they are learning in person or at home. This very first meeting had over 37 families attend, and they began their training in Schoology and Skyward. So that was really exciting. As you can see, we found lots of creative ways to ensure that rigorous learning continues in all disciplines. And I am now pleased to welcome a new addition to the schools update portion of our evening, Superintendent Jett. I will turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Chair Polreese and members of the board. I'm lucky to get to take part in the schools update this week. And as you've heard, there's lots of great learning, teaching, and community building happening in our schools. At the start of the school year, we held listening sessions with students, families, and staff, and we asked what is important to them about the upcoming school year. Our stakeholders identified 4 things: prioritizing the health and safety of our students, staff, and families, ensuring rigorous academic expectations and routines, providing quality, effective instruction, and lastly, creating opportunities for meaning, social connections. I've shared this with you before, but it's worth sharing again because these commitments have driven and continue to drive our decision making. Next slide. The first expectation of our learning community and primary commitment by our district is to prioritize the health and safety of our students, staff, and families. So tonight, I'd like to update you on COVID-19 case rates and its impact on our secondary learning model. Each week, I share the county case rates provided by MDE with our staff and families. Unfortunately, we've seen a rise in these case rates, and based on the forecast of local government and health officials, we're being told to expect case rates to exceed 30 in at least one of our counties served by our district this upcoming week, at the end of this week. The chart on the screen may look familiar to you. This is the chart MDE provided school districts in their Safe Learning Plan, and it's what we shared with you at the beginning of the school year. As you can see, when the county case rates exceed 30, school districts are required to transition to distance learning for grades 6 through 12, as mandated by the governor's executive order. So what does this mean for District 742? First, the transition. The transition to distance learning 2.0, I might add, for students in grades 6 through 12 will begin on Wednesday, October 14th at the following sites: Kennedy, North, South, Apollo, McKinley, and Tech. This means that students will not be required to log into Schoology on the 14th, and no new instruction will take place. Students may be working on assignments, etc. And staff will be preparing for the transition so they can be ready to conduct all classes online beginning Monday, October 19th. Second, instruction for distance learning 2.0. It begins again on Monday, October 19th. Just want everybody to hear that twice. Third, people will want to know what impact does this have on elementary, in other words, PK through 5. This transition is only for secondary students. There will be no changes for PK through 5 because they are already learning in the hybrid model. There will be no changes for our students enrolled in the Distance Learning Academy, and there will be no changes for students enrolled in our special programs, including REC, Roosevelt, InStep, CO2, Clara's House, Journey, 180 Group Home, and Recovery Plus. In the previous slide, you heard me reference Distance Learning 2.0. So last spring, we did distance learning for the very first time. After listening to the experiences of our students, our families, and staff, we made changes. We've improved access. Thanks to streaming sources from the government and from our outstanding community partners, we have hotspots for all our families and headphones for all students who need them. Also, as you saw in the earlier slide, we've trained our BCSSs and EEOCs on Schoology and Skyward. They, in turn, are training parents and are better able to provide support for our multilingual families and students. Next, we now have more accountability and structure. Students will be required to follow their daily schedules, just like if they were in our brick and mortar schools. They'll log into Schoology at the start of each class period and meet with classmates and teachers through Google Meet. We also reduced the number of classes students have to navigate daily from 6 to 3. This allows more sustained focus for both students and teachers. We've also enhanced the consistency and engagement. We've partnered with our learning and teaching teams to provide professional learning opportunities for our teachers. Our Schoology course format is more uniform, which makes it easier for students to navigate their classes and assignments. Our teachers have more strategies to engage students virtually, including online tools and the chunking of lessons into smaller segments. We've also added advisory into our daily schedule. Students have the opportunity to connect with classmates, gain support, and receive instruction in social emotional learning, self-advocacy, and mental well-being. And so the question is going to be, in the 742 community, everybody's going to want to know, what or when will our secondary students return to the hybrid learning model? At our August board meeting, we established that a transition back to a less restrictive learning model, in this case, hybrid for grades 6 through 12, would require 3 consecutive weeks of case rates below 30. And with that, that's my part of this presentation. And Chair Polrees, members of the board, questions?
Les, do you have any questions?
No, I do not. Thank you, Mr. Jett.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Natalie, you'd be next.
No, thanks for all the hard work that you guys not only do now, but everything you did over the summer to think through every possibility so that when we are coming to this possibility, we already know what the plan is. So that gives some safety in a what can be a very unsafe time. So thank you to everyone on administration.
Thank you.
Shannon, go ahead.
Does this change any of our activities that we have scheduled before or after school at those grade levels?
Shannon, can you repeat that question? My microphone did something.
The schools that are being changed, does this change any before or after school activities, protocols, and practices?
Okay, so thank you, Shannon. For activities, all scheduled practices and contests will continue through October 17th. We will be consulting with MDE and MDH on next steps regarding activities.
Thank you.
Answer your question? You're welcome.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that great presentation. We will go on to school presentations. Last one for tonight. It's going to be led by Dr. Sylvia Huff, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, Assessment, and Enrollment. And I think it's going to be co-presented by Natalie Ringsmith, Chair of the Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee. Am I correct?
You know what? I am going to leave it mostly to Sylvia, to Dr. Huff. So this is just to give you an introduction. I think everybody kind of knows what we're doing here, but we are taking this time to continue the discussion that we had about a month ago, I think it was, and the discussions we've continued to have in the Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee regarding what we see when school presentations come to the board, what we'd like to see, get all on the same page so that we can tell the administration and the administration can tell principals, this is what the board is requesting of you, and we can all, we can have sustainability within the school presentations that are done over a 2-year period. So Dr. Huff came up with a wonderful way for us to have input in that. including talking about the input we've already had and then building on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Huff.
Thanks, Natalie. And so I think it'll probably be best if I present most of this from my office, but at times I might come into the conference room with you all when we're putting things on the chart paper. Okay, so Natalie has pretty much addressed the objectives, but basically the activities that we are going to take you through tonight, the goal is to determine the purpose as well as the audience for the school presentations, and then also to gather your input on the data that will be given to you going forward during these presentations. And so, as Natalie mentioned, when this topic was first introduced about a month ago, it was clear from the responses that you all shared that there are some questions that need to be answered before we can begin to determine the data that will be most meaningful to you. So for instance, there needs to be a consensus on the purpose of the presentation. From your comments, we need to figure out whether or not the presentations are intended to be a highlight reel. So is it an opportunity for principals to communicate all of the unique and exciting happenings at their buildings that don't always make it into the headlines? Or are the presentations intended to be more authentic representations and profiles of the school? Are the presentations supposed to detail the strengths of the schools, the growth that has taken place over the years, and then the areas of opportunity? So that's one aspect that we'll be getting at this evening. Another question that arose from your initial feedback last month was the question around who the primary audience is for these presentations. Is the intended audience supposed to be the school board? So is the primary audience you all, so that you can get all of the information that you need in order to make informed decisions and provide oversight as it relates to policy and so forth? Or is the intended audience the public? Is the audience supposed to be those who are at home watching and streaming this, who are just eager to learn more about all of the programming that's taking place and what's going on in the schools within our district? And so determining these two things first, I think will help bring us closer to figuring out what type of data we should be including in the presentations and why. So in front of you should be a stapled packet that looks like this. And for Natalie and Dr. Green, I emailed you the information, so it should be in your inbox. And so for the first activity, what I would like for you all to do is to each take a little bit of time. We'll just take probably around 5 to 10 minutes, not much. Thinking through the pros and cons of each of the categories. So on this first page, you have the different quadrants. So we have the audience, school board, public, as well as the purpose, highlight reel versus authentic profile. So in thinking through those categories, and we can just use the upper left as an example, if the intended audience is the school board and the purpose is for the presentations to serve as a highlight reel for schools, what are the initial benefits of that you see, as well as the drawbacks? So the pros and cons of each category. And as you're reflecting on those, I want you to ultimately, you'll be using that to determine the quadrant that is the most important for school presentations. So really this first page is just for you to think about the benefits and drawbacks of each, which ones would have more gaps than the others, because the next step will be you essentially deciding on a quadrant, and we will get into that in a moment. So I'll give you like 5 minutes or so just to jot down your thoughts in that quadrant. And then maybe when you all are ready, you can just give me a thumbs up and we can keep going.
See all of discussion.
So I noticed that Al gave his thumbs up. Al and others, as you are finishing that part of it, you'll notice the 3 red stickers that are attached. These are your tokens, if you will. And on the empty table in the DAO conference room with you right now, there is a sheet of chart paper that has a larger version of the 4 quadrants. What I would like for you to do is, based on the information that you've jotted down, determine which of the quadrants is the most important. So you basically have 3 points and you can allocate them however you choose. If you want to put 2 points in the primary being a highlight reel for the school board and 1 in an authentic profile for the public, go for it. If you want to put all 3 in another quadrant, you can choose how you want to allocate your stickers, but feel free to go ahead and put them on the chart paper. For Natalie and Dr. Green, I have your stickers, so you can just tell me where you want me to place them.
Do you want us to type it in the chat or tell you?
Either way is fine.
I don't want to sway any of my fellow board members. I would like 1 in public highlight reel and 2 in authentic profile school board. Thank
1,
you.
so both for school board, but 1 in the highlight reel and 2 in authentic profile. Did I hear you correctly?
So close. So 2 in the authentic profile school board, but then 1 in highlight reel public.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Oh. Natalie's got 2 up here and 1 down.
Just put Natalie's on there. Dr. Huff,
Yes.
do you have this quadrant on a slide that the public can see?
I can pull it up. Sure.
Just kind of give them a heads up of what we're doing here. And will they also see the final results?
Yes, we will be bringing the final results back as well.
Dr. Huff,
Yes.
Les Green here. I think I'm not sure that I do this right. For school board, I think, if I understand it, it's just sort of a highlight reel. Just where I would like to put 1 of mine, and that's, I think, school board. The others are, both would be under public, which is the highlight reel, authentic profile, 1 each.
So I heard you would want 1 for the school board highlight reel and 2 under public authentic profile? Okay.
I think that, no, 1 each. I think it's highlight reel for the public and the authentic profile. Can I do that?
Yes, you can. Okay, I'm gonna go take the stickers down there, and then everyone else's should be on the chart paper, and then we can keep going. So give me 1 second.
What? It is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. by them watching it, it's for the public, but we need the information. It's for us, yeah.
All right. So based on the stickers, and where did I put my sheet? There, so that you all can see what they're doing. So based on the allocation of the points, it was very clear that the main focus in terms of audience and purpose as determined by this group is that the school presentation should be providing an authentic profile of the school for the school board. And the second closest, but still this one won by quite a few, is that it would be a highlight reel for the school board. And so
that was 11 to 6. 11 to 6. 11 in the top corner and 6, or I'm sorry, 11 in the top right, 6 in the top left.
Thank you.
Do you want the other two?
Yeah, what are the other two?
Bottom left 3, and bottom right 1.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so then let's go ahead and keep going. So I guess my question for you before we move on to the next activity is the board comfortable with coming to a consensus that the intended purpose of the school presentations is to provide an authentic profile and that the primary audience is intended to be the school board? Is everyone fine with that being the consensus based on the numbers? Thumbs up, yes?
I wasn't, but it's all right. More useful to have our website reflect something that parents and the public could go to and say, what are they actually doing in our school?
Can everybody hear Dr. Green?
Yeah, it's quiet, but you can hear him.
Dr. Green, could you speak a little bit more into the mic?
Oh, all right. I just thought that, and I'm not, it's not a point of argument, but it's just that I always felt that the reason for the school presentation should always be on the televised board meeting, because then the presentation actually wound up on our website, so the public, a parent, could go to the website and actually look at what's happening at Kennedy, look at what's happening at Tech. And so that was why I thought the most important part of that was of the presentation itself was for public view. But that's, you know,
You muted yourself at the end, Dr. Green.
oh, maybe I was trying to sneak in a comment that nobody could hear. I'm comfortable with whatever the board wants to do. I didn't mean to hit the button. Okay, I'm done now. I'm going to mute my mic.
Okay. All right, so then with that in mind, knowing now who our intended audience is as well as the purpose, in front of you should also be a list of the various data sets that we have available to you. And the next question that we want you to answer is, given the purpose that was just decided and the primary audience, which of the following data sets are most important to include in a school presentation? And when I say school presentation, I mean the data packet as well as the presentation, just like the whole deal. Which of these data sets, and I can pull up the list so that people at home can also see.
Dr. Huff?
Yes.
I see in the chat that Monica said she has a similar thought to Dr. Green. So I don't know if we maybe need to stay there for a minute just so everyone feels comfortable. Monica, you're comfortable? Just want to make sure you are.
Yeah, just agree with what Dr. Green was saying.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Thanks, Monica. Go ahead, Dr. Huff.
And thank you for monitoring the chat because I did not see that at all. Okay. Again. Okay, so in front of you, you should have the list of the possible data sets. And so with the school board as the intended audience and the authentic profile as the given purpose, I would like for you to categorize the data in front of you according to 3 different areas. And so at the bottom of your sheet, you will see the rating categories. You'll want to give it a 1 if it's critical, 2 if it would be supplemental, or 3 if that particular data would not be aligned with providing an authentic profile of the school for your purposes as the school board. So you can go ahead and provide your ratings. If you have any questions about what the listed data is, I can definitely explain it to you. Just for clarity for a couple of them, so the very last one, the AF grade analysis, would basically be saying the percentage of Fs for a given trimester at middle school or high school, or the percent passing versus not. We could also, for activities participation data, the different activities that are offered at elementary, middle, and high school in terms of who is participating, what those demographics look like. I think the others are pretty self-explanatory, but if you have questions, just let me know.
So Sylvia, I do have a question. So this is just the data that we wanted to be accompanying the package, or is this things that we wanted to always see in the schools when they present? What would be
This would be in the packet, but then also, as you know, the data in the presentation is pulled from the data packet. So we want to start with this to get a sense of what you deem critical to have the full profile. And then from these lists, we'll be able to determine what we want to consistently also include in the presentation that is shown to you, in addition to everything else that's provided in the packet. Does that make sense? So like if you have 7 of these items that are in the data packet and you want 4 of them consistently presented on the screen by the principal of that 7.
I want all of them. That's a good list. It's a good start.
Al's answer is yes, right? That's what I was thinking. Let's put 3 on every single one.
I agree with Al. I think that I would mark them all as supplemental.
I didn't know my mic was up.
So that, sorry, as supplemental. The reason I'm talking is because I can't fill in the form at all. I don't know how to do that. But they seem to be also supplemental. But what's critical for me is the interpretation of what the information means as delivered by the principal and by Dr. Huff in terms of are we moving in the right direction? Are we doing something we shouldn't be doing, or should we? What should we be? This is sort of a Dr. Huff's takeaway concept is really fascinating me because it lets me focus on the things. What does this data really mean? And so that would be my perspective.
So since now I know that you guys know my mic was on, when I said that, I think it's a great list. And these are all things that I'd like to see. The only ones that I would say aren't real important to me are probably the A through F grade analysis at the bottom, but maybe it is. I don't know. We haven't done that one before. I don't think that I can remember. But I think all of that stuff is important to know. And then the thing that I feel is missing is I'd like to see some sort of a school rank or comparison to other schools in the district. So here's where my school is, and it's ranking, as an elementary school, it's ranking number 6 out of 8. And then the most important part of that would be the analysis or the why. Why is it? So that's to be explained by the principal or the presenters. This is the data. Here's where we sit. Here's why we believe we're there and what we're doing about it.
There are, can I say something?
Sure.
So there are things that I don't see here that I don't know if we're going to discuss in some more point of this or not, that I would like to get a better picture of the school. And one thing that I would like to know is what activities, opportunities those schools, those kids that go to those schools have, what kind of groups, opportunities they have in those schools, and what is the participation rate of those students from those schools in those opportunities. I know that some of them, so when we get presentations in activities, for example, we get them separate from the schools, but doesn't tell me anything about how the school in general is participating in those activities. So I am interested in knowing those kind of things. I'm interested in extracurricular activities that are offered as an opportunity and how the students take advantage of those, and that it will help me to complete the profile of the students for me in a more complete way than understanding these values that are very numerical in terms of the scores, and there is not a lot of here that tells me about social and emotional.
There is one line on there, Monica, for activities participation data. Maybe we ask that's expanded, is what you're saying? So it actually lists what activities and what social events do?
Social and emotional, but so I don't know what is the, yes, I mean, you may be right, Jeff. I don't know activities participation data, what does that give us?
Yeah.
I wanted to say too, I know that Dr. Green can't fill it out tonight, but if you could, when you're able, Dr. Green, that'd be great. This will be really, even though this is tough, to really say exactly one, 2, or 3, especially between 2 and 3. This will be really helpful data for us to talk at our next committee meeting. So if you could fill it out, even if it's not right at this minute, like Dr. Green can't, then that would be really helpful for our committee's purposes.
Dr. Huff, mine's filled out, I'll turn it in, but I don't agree with one of the parts that Al said about ranking the schools. I don't see that as being a productive tool to rank a school against another school. I mean, because all things aren't equal. That would be an unfair ranking, in my opinion.
I agree with Jeff. I think that'll set us up for, I don't think that'll be a good look for us.
I don't see anything productive coming out of that ranking. I just don't.
That's exactly what the state does.
And the state's wrong.
Well, but we really concentrate on growth, right? So we've changed the way that we're looking at this, and I understand that's what the state does, and for some districts that works, but for us it doesn't. And so
I don't think that we focus on growth. We focus on growth and achievement. One set of test scores measures achievement, and the other measures growth. And it's the combination of the two. If a child is underachieving, you need to have a growth strategy to bring that child up, to have them achieve at a higher level.
Right.
If they're overachieving, or if they're achieving higher than their grade level, since no kid ever overachieves, then you still want to see that growth, but you have to have a growth strategy that's different for that child. Right. So it's an individual thing. The state compares schools. The state compares schools and school districts, and I don't know if that's what they're going to look at. I think that's if we're afraid to look at it, then we're never going to look good.
Well, I don't think we're afraid to look at it, but
we kind of are if we're not going to look at it.
But I've been at many board meetings where you exactly argue the exact opposite point. That the state,
of course I do, because I don't believe that schools. They don't compare. They're not similar demographics. They aren't similar in any way. But I think to acknowledge that is the right thing to do. We rank number 8 out of 9. However, with the demographics of our students, or with the demographics and income levels of the students in this school, we face these challenges. And that can be overcome by breaking it out within the school by demographic, and show that you've got very high achieving students within that school It's what the state does to us, and we don't ever take the time and opportunity to counter what the state's doing to us. We just accept to the fact that the MCAs go to this paper, and they publish them, and then every retailer, every realtor in the area grabs those and puts them on their websites and says St. Cloud schools stink.
I think I hear I hear what you're saying, and I think that if we're gonna be all in for authentic profile school board, and if that's what we have to ask ourselves, is making sure that we're saying that part of our authenticity. And I can understand where you're coming from. I don't know the right answer to that. I can understand where you're coming from.
Can I hope, I don't think that we should be in competition with other school districts or with ourselves. Those are for athletic activities. I think what Monica talked about was an issue of, we have a certain kind, a degree or array of student activities that are, say, who's participating in those, and if we wanted to take a ranking, then having 80 to 90% of all of our students participating in some of our activities with adult supervision, that would be a better measure, I think, of how useful we might be as an educational institution. But regardless of whether the state does anything in terms of ranking our schools, I don't think it has any impact on us. I think, not to the degree that we should worry about it. That our scores are what they are because of the students we have, and we have good teachers who are trying to educate students, and we're not in the business of trying to popularize our district so that we can pull students from other places. But I think that at some point, the discussion that Al has started, that we've talked about, needs to continue, and we should actually figure out what we think our role as a district is to compete with other districts and draw students here, or to really focus on educating those that we have and to the best of our ability. So with that, I'll leave my comment.
Monica's next.
So I understand. Okay, let me think. Part of what Al says, or what I heard that Al says, is that we should include data, comparison data with other schools to show how, to give a real picture of how the performance of our school is in comparison to others. That's kind of what I understand. I don't think, what I think is that comparison is extremely difficult. And that's why the Department of Education only take certain parameters that are easier to compare. Like, let's say it's easier to compare MCA. But if we're going to do the same thing as the Department of Education and put it in MCA scores in our thing, well, might as well just have people going to the Department of Education. So that comparison won't tell us anything more about how our school is performing better or not compared to other students, unless we do an analysis.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that doing an analysis for every single presentation, even if it comes to the board, it is hard work. It is a lot of time consuming for the staff to do that. And it takes a lot of the presentation. So I understand your point, and I think that is important to be addressed. At the same time, I don't know kind of the cost benefit of having it in the presentations for the schools is what we wanted to do, when I also think that we do need to know ourselves, all the other parts of the school. That's my comment.
I think by having that data broken down by each school within our district, we succeed as a team and we fail as a team. If the MCA data is going to be in the St. Cloud Times, and the St. Cloud Times says, don't live in the St. Cloud School District, it's such a bad district. And then we take that and go, and by the way, You don't want to live in the Kennedy School District because it's our worst of 8. Or that other. Why would we do that to ourselves, people? The school presentation needs to have authentic data, but we don't need to put it on a list. And that's counterproductive in my eyes.
So are we talking here about if, basically it seems like we're talking about if something needs to be added to the list or not, as far as a ranking. Did I hear anything else, or did I miss anything else of maybe we need to add this as well to the list?
I think that was the only item so far, right? Al? Yeah, that was the only item that Al suggested to add to the list.
Well, I did
add activities data. Further activities data.
More
Monica?
activities data. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying, Monica? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, activities data, and I am not sure about measurements or anything that tell us about social and emotional work or development. And I don't have any data about that, and I will yield to Dr. Potter about it, maybe. Not right now, but I mean.
I think the climate survey will show us some of that, but not social and emotional growth, maybe, unless we are seeing percentages grow in, I'm feeling safe at school and things of that nature.
We have a separate presentation for the climate survey. I would suggest just taking it out of the school presentations altogether. You're going to hear that data twice then.
Dr. Huff, what do you... All right, go ahead, Al.
Oh, I would like to know what the cabinet and the principals think. What if they did this? What they'd come up with?
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
Because I don't
you have to put your name on it.
I mean, here's the thing that's been frustrating me with the school presentations is we get partial information. You give me a little bit of information, but not enough to where it makes any sense so that I can do anything with it. It's a little picture of what's going on in the school, and then it's a presentation about all the fluff. And if we want, we can take all the data out and just do a fluff. But then where do I go to get that data? Or is it something that the administration feels I, as a school board member, don't need? I don't need the details and data by school. They need to come to me and tell me what they need and what resources and funds they need so that they can distribute them in the way that they feel is the best to enhance the education of the kids. I can live with either one, but I don't want a half picture. I don't want a few data points and only the best, where we say the third graders at Madison in math scored high, and then we go to the fifth graders in reading scored high, and it doesn't, I'm not getting a picture of what's going on in the school. And I don't know where that school, you can tell me that 80% of the kids scored good. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't have anything to compare it to.
Al, to your point, another recommendation that we have heard from administrators, we haven't taken them through this process, but just in talking to some individuals, letting them know that we would be taking you all through this process, is the idea of having the SIP potentially guide the school presentations. So each school has their school improvement plan, and it has their buildings goals, and the SIP has been reworked to where it is aligned to World's Best Workforce. So the goals within World's Best Workforce that are relevant to a grade level. So for example, all students ready for kindergarten, we wouldn't have that data for high school, but that's a goal at the elementary, whereas some of the graduation rate data, which only applies to high school, wouldn't be available for the others. They have their building goals in all of those areas. And the MCAs are encompassed in that, STAR data, there's equity goals, behavior goals. And so if we wanted something to be consistent in format, but not necessarily the data, like the goals themselves, because each building is creating their SIP that based on their building needs, that could be a framework for the school presentation. And it would still allow the principals to provide their narrative of the school and tell the story within the framework of the SIP in terms of strengths and weaknesses and where they see themselves going and the strategies that they're implementing to get there.
That sounds good. I mean, it sounds like a good base to me.
I agree, and so does Monica, according to the chat.
So that's one. Okay, I'll put that down. Possibility.
Les and Shannon and Jeff, what do you think about that?
I agree. I'd like to see it once. Makes sense.
This just makes me wonder if we're doing this exercise backwards, and we should have maybe asked the principals first.
Dr. Huff,
Yeah.
as chair, I would like you to ask all the principals this and get back to the board. We need to see what the other side's thinking too. They work in the building, they own it.
Ask all the principals what? I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Have them go through this exercise.
Oh, okay, the principals. I thought you were saying the cabinet. Okay.
Well, I said principals and cabinet, but what do they feel this presentation is supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, actually having a recommendation.
I think that's really great. And I think, I think basically I think Dr. Putnam asked, well, we have to kind of get hurried up on this because these are going to start soon. I don't think that's, and she wanted to just honor that we wanted to change it before the new round of school presentations start again, but that's not really the goal here. The goal is more of like a deep dive into what's sustainable. And so the goal that I had, that her and I talked about, and Sylvia and I as well, is that we could have this done by the end of this year. I don't want to go into the next year because maybe I'm not the chair of that committee. So if this process, it doesn't have to go till December 31st, but like that's the goal, is that we have this figured out by the time that the new year rolls around and we have new board members, and if that's agreeable to all the other board members.
So instead of continuing this tonight, what I'm hearing is that we should take the principals through the same 2 activities that we've conducted with you all, get their opinion in terms of who the audience is and the purpose, and what data they think would allow them to best tell their school story. And then we will bring all of that information from the data gathered here tonight, as well as the input from the principals, back to the Achievement Integration Committee, where we will triangulate everything and then disseminate outcomes, next steps from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can do the first exercise we did, but that's really up to us. Like, it'd be interesting to have to know from them what they think is the purpose, so that we could get on the same page with the purpose. But I think really that's, for me anyway, it's that second bit that I would really want to know from them what they want to show us.
Okay, and so then in knowing that North's presentation is happening in 2 weeks, I am hearing that we are okay with not holding North to any of the parameters necessarily that were established here this evening. And because we know that they've already started developing their presentation, and this will be ongoing work. And once we have all of the parameters set, then we'll move forward with the other schools at that point.
I'd like to see that information come to us maybe the second meeting in November, and the next couple or school presentations do their best.
It'd be, if we're going to do that, it would be great if it could come to our committee this month. But
Yeah.
that would be a 2-week turnaround here for principals. So I don't know if that's a possibility. Because
when
we
is
really,
North's? When
well,
is
I
North's?
just, in 2 weeks, but what I'm talking about is the principals filling out of that information, because I would like to have that before the committee meets next. And that's is that next week? In 2 weeks from now.
I'm just wondering if you could incorporate some of what you were talking about with building goals into North's, so that we could see what that might look like.
Oh, the school improvement plan? That would be great to give us an idea of what that looks like. Yeah, great. If that's a possibility.
But one thing that I want to say, that it is my interest in having this exercise by us, having some sort of a, let's say, standardized way to have presentations, for a lack of a better term, is that I do want to see continuity of the style of the presentation from one year to another, because similar to what Al was talking about, like what to compare with, what I like to compare is what is the school in 1 year to the year before and the year before. And at least the profile, having some consistency on that, so we can see how things have changed within the same school is something that I like to do and I have not been able to do. So I don't know if that is important for other board members. So I'd like to ask you if that is important to you or not.
To Al, you mean, or to?
So,
to everybody.
Natalie, that was determined prior to this, wasn't it? I remember that conversation. It seemed like everybody wanted consistency.
Oh, for sure.
You know, from one year to the next, and yeah.
And I
It's
think
very,
the other thing that was consistent, I think, well, the thing that the reason that we're kind of driving this and doing this is consistency. And like whenever I would ask a question about any of the data packet and it wasn't included in the slides, I felt like I was basically coming at the principal, you know, and not that the principal felt that way, but like, you know, there's so much data in that data packet, and I would just grab something and ask, and they would always have an answer, but it felt like I was putting somebody on trial instead of like seeking to understand, which I think the school improvement plan would be more like seeking to understand. So what else, does any other board member have any feedback before we go, or Dr. Huff? So just so we blew up your whole process here.
Oh no, this is fine. And I will hold off on the final 2 questions that I have, because I think our determined next steps will be based off of what we find out from principals and then from our further committee conversations.
Would you still like all board members to get you that chart with the 1s, 2s, and 3s?
Yes, I will pick it up from the ones who are here when this adjourns, and then if the 2 of you all would be able to email it to me, that'd be great.
Yep, I just did that. Okay, wonderful.
Dr. Huff, walk me through the timeline. Can we get this done this year so the January school board presentations are online with this?
Yes, so I believe that is the goal. So when I will have to work with Marsha and Lori to figure out how best to roll this out to the principals. And so I don't know if that'll just be a Google form for them to do on their own time, or if it'll be during the principal meeting, but we'll figure out the plan for that. Once we have that data, we will bring it to the November A&I committee meeting, because October's is too soon. It's like next week. And at the November meeting, we will prior to that meeting, I will have already compiled what you all deem as critical, what the building deems as critical, and any feedback that the principals provided that was open-ended. And I've been taking notes of what you stated. So I'll take all of that to the A&I November meeting. From there, we will discuss what was compiled, put forth our recommendation of what we think has come out of all of this in terms of what the board needs to see in order to get an authentic profile of the schools, and present that ideally it would be at the November school board meeting, because A&I would meet prior to. And so
like the day before, right?
Is it the day before? I don't
know. I have to look. Oh no, because that's Thanksgiving, right? So let's talk about that offline.
Yeah. Otherwise, I would say it would come to you all at the December work session, and so that way we would be ready for January.
Okay.
That's a good plan. Thank you so much, Dr. Huff, for leading us into the promised land that now just got even wider. So appreciate it.
Thank you all for being willing to work during the work session and do an activity.
I love to work during the work session. This is fun.
Thanks.
All right. Are you good, Dr. Huff?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I want to jump back to item number 5, school updates, activity updates, and COVID updates. I had an important question I wanted to ask Willie, but I didn't get a chance. It slid by. From what I heard you say on October 17th, whatever the date was, that we pretty much are going to have to go into distance learning at the high school level. And Shannon asked that date. And Shannon asked a question about activities, but I kind of want to hear it straight up. With the sports, they cannot have sports when you're in distance learning, correct?
So that is correct. That is our, Chair Pulverish, that is correct. That is our interpretation and what we were instructed in the beginning of the school year when we had conversations with MDE. We've also, and the bottom line is we value our kids having extracurricular activities and being able to socialize and being able to do some things. What we have found between just say this afternoon and this evening is we're making sure that we're doing it correctly. There have been a couple districts across the state who have extenuating circumstances. And with that, the Department of Health, MDH, stepped in and told them that they could participate or that they could have activities. And so we want to make sure that we are doing what we are told to do and what the guidance says. What the guidance says as of the beginning of the school year, if you are in distance learning because of the numbers, because of the county case rates, no, you would not be having activities. Activities would be done. But we're making sure that we're dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's and having that conversation with the Department of Health and with MDE and with the high school league. But our interpretation and all the superintendents on the line, we understood it as if you are in distance learning, you are not having activities. But we've heard a couple other districts in outstate Minnesota. And so we're just trying to make sure that we confirm our interpretation.
Did those districts in outstate Minnesota go to a distance learning when they didn't have to? And that's how they got around they could still do sports or activities, I should say?
From what I understand, of the two districts that I know, one did that and one did not.
Okay.
Okay. And Chair Polreese, what I can tell you is there was another district that said we're not going to adhere to the guidance, and they had to have a special meeting to announce that they were going to adhere to the guidance from the state.
Okay. I mean, I just thought that would be tough news to hear, but I thought it needed to be out there.
Nope. And thank you for the question, because that is, and superintendent, all of us, is it what we want to do? Our kids have worked so hard. They've been thinking about this all their lives. You know, you have seniors that could be participating for the one last time, you know, in a football game, in various sports, cross country, things of that nature, volleyball. And all of a sudden, we're in this moment where that wish, that dream, that want, that being prepared for is not going to exist or potentially could not exist. And that's why we want to make sure we do our due diligence before we completely end that.
If that decision is made and you get to that, will that be shared with the coaches, the staff? I mean, all the staff that's involved with that, to make sure every kid at least get a chance to play or participate or sing or whatever the activity is?
The minute we make sure that we get the guidance, the minute that we confirm that, we will be sharing that with all of our all of our 742 community, so that they understand that, our staff. Our ADs, Peter Hammerlink, Dave Langaroo, Charlie Eisenreich at the middle school level, they are going to advocate for kids to be able to participate. That is their job, to advocate for kids participating. That is a coach's job, to advocate for their kids participating. That is the musicals and the choir directors and the National Honor Society coordinators and the directors. That is their jobs. And we wouldn't want them in that position if they weren't advocating for kids to participate. And we recognize the importance of participation and the self-esteem that comes with that. And so will that information come out, Chair Polreese? The answer is yes. The minute we know something, the minute we confirm everything, we will make sure the 742 community understands.
Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome, sir.
Anybody else? Ellie had a question, same thing?
It's not on that. I want to go back to the school presentation thing for a second and just talk about. Leslie made a comment that it isn't. We shouldn't be looking at it as competing with other districts. And I just want to say that I wish the same could be said about the other districts looking this way, because I do feel like they compete with us, and they aren't shy about the fact that they compete with us and talk about their numbers and how much better they are so that they can recruit our students away from us. And I guess during the League of Women Voters Forum last night, they asked me what the #1 issue was in the St. Cloud. They asked all of us what we thought the #1 issue was in the St. Cloud School District. And my answer, unbelievably, wasn't the special education cost subsidy, but it was.
But it was related.
But it was talking about the district image and how can we get the image of how can we improve the image of our district, and how can we get it so that residents understand that our schools outperform the other schools in the area. You send a kid to our school who's a high achiever, to our school district, who's a high average to high achiever, they are going to achieve as well or better in our school district, and they're going to have a lot more opportunities to learn. We have exceptional advanced placement coursework. We have talent development in elementary. We've got so many things going for us here. Yet, you get out into the community and you start talking to people, and especially realtors and realtor sites, and that isn't how they rank us. And that's why I brought up that piece, that we need to somehow address that, and we need to tell the story. Every one of our schools needs to tell the story as to why it just isn't true. It's not true that they're a bad school. They're a good school, and their overall MCA scores might be lower, but hey, there's reasons for that when you look at this school, and there's reasons for that when you look at this district, and we have to get it to where people understand. And it has the payoff or the payback in it is increased attendance or retention of students within our area, and increased property values for the residents of the district. And I think those are two really, really important pieces. And the special education cost subsidy, by the way, has a lot to do with this, because that $11 million that we come up short every year would go a long way towards solving some of these problems. But that's why I brought that up, Les. And I just...
I'll take over for you.
Can I add something too?
Yeah, please do, Monica.
So in those data points, Sylvia, one thing that Al made me think about is about the special education students. I don't know how is that related to the school, or how is that seen to the schools, like special education students from that school. Maybe that's not for that presentation. Maybe it's for a presentation of a special education. When we have a presentation of special education, how is that reflected? Going back to the point of Al, when we're talking about cross subsidy, it's really difficult to understand and explain the problem. And I don't know how, when we talk about it, how we reflect it. And another thing that I wanted to point out is that another couple of things that I'll mention about opportunities that students have at our schools. I'm not sure that, because of the reasons that I said before, I'm not sure that I think that the analysis and the comparison needs to be done for us because of the reasons that I already explained. But the clear picture is something that I do agree in having. So I'd like to see, I don't know what opportunities our students have and how are they taking advantage of those opportunities in each school, especially high school. In special, when we're talking about college credits, and we're talking about those kind of things, college credits, and also what was the other thing, AP courses, and those opportunities that the people look at. I don't see them always reflected in the data or profile or how the schools comes, and that will also help me to get the picture. So just wanted to mention that.
All right, that will wrap it up for tonight. The time is 9:30. That ends our work session. It's now adjourned. Good night. Enjoy the warm weather this weekend. And once again, happy birthday, Willie.
Thanks.